Howdy, I'm Tony from Texas, and I'm in Spain.
I have always been enchanted by Spain. It is the country where I trace my name to, home to the language of my father's family and the former colonial master of my home country of Texas. But I was also greatly interested in the old Morrish civilization that flourished here for 1,000 years, while Europe was in the Dark Ages. That, more than anything, is what brought me to Andalusia. My first stop after I got off the bus from Portugal was the sleepy little town of Arcos de la Frontera. Any of the towns in this region that have de la Frontera in their name were once on the front lines of the Reconquista, the centuries-long battle Christians waged against the Moors for control of the Iberian Peninsula. Arcos is the jewel of the hill towns, without ever assuming too much of itself. It's something that must be experienced, to make the climb to the cliffs up here and look down over the backs of birds as they fly by. An important note about pork. If you're in Spain and you can eat it, you must eat it. It's fantastic. It's like a whole new delicious critter I've never tasted before that might melt in your mouth so quick all you're left with is a dream. Focusing too much on the big cities when traveling is the worst mistake that can be made, and I'm guilty of it myself sometimes. But after spending a little time with real people leading real lives as they have for hundreds of years, you regret the time you could have been spending in the countryside. March in Andalusia is accented with a sweet scent of orange blossoms in the breeze, and rolling hills of green that seem less earthly and more like the golf course of God. My next stop was the last great bastion of the Umayyad Caliphate, Granada. The Christian Spaniards already conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula for several hundred years by the time the last holdout, Granada, fell in 1492. It is home to the Alhambra Palace, one of the greatest historical sites in Europe. The Alhambra, many of you may say though, but it just says Alhambra in Arabic. That's right, no idea where the extra B came from. Alhambra, or the red, refers to the old Alcazaba, or fort, that is made of red brick and glows a particularly pretty red hue at sunset. The Alhambra is massive. You should plan on an entire day in Granada just for the Alhambra. In fact, there are 3 palaces in the Alhambra, a city, and an old fort to explore. Closest to the entrance gate is the Generalife Gardens and a Moorish summer palace. It's a good idea to check out the smaller palace first, because after you see the main Palacios Nazarenes, nothing will ever impress you again. The gardens are nice, and the summer palace as a first taste of the Alhambra is a good start. There are also good views from here where you can see the rest of the Alhambra complex. Make sure you get in line before your stamp ticket time to enter the Palace of the Nazarenes. That's the only time constraint you have. Once you're in, take your time to stare up into the breathtaking ceilings. I know I could have for hours. The pictures just don't do it right. You have to see it for yourself. Every intricate pattern and carving glorifying Allah is a final flaunting of the wealth of the Moors. This was all built after the decline of the Caliphate, so it's all kind of like having a huge lavish party before declaring bankruptcy.
This is the famous courtyard in the Alhambra Palace. Found here, just been photographed countless times as a gift of the Jewish people of Granada to the Muslim rulers. There's 12 lions, and people think today that they originally represented 12 tribes of Israel. This fountain also functions as a clock at one point, each lion's head doing something different for every hour. But when the Christians finally conquered the Alhambra in Granada, they took it apart to see how it worked. And once they did, they broke it, and it didn't work for a long, long time. It was under major reconstruction for the past couple of years, but now it's finally back for everybody to enjoy.
But the most lavish way the wealth of Granada was displayed was with water. Water, which is so valuable in most of the Muslim world, was constantly bubbling forth from every part of the palace. In fact, water is the greatest decoration of the Alhambra. Another part of the massive Alhambra complex is the Palace of Charles of Spain, now composed of several museums and built in as Roman a style as possible, to let the world know that he was the Holy Roman Emperor and the next great Caesar, even though it was the 1600s. The last stop is Alcazaba, an old fort whose wall provides some of the best views of Granada and the surrounding mountains that you can find anywhere. My last city to visit in Spain was Córdoba, the legendary capital of the Umayyad Caliphate. In its heyday, Córdoba was the greatest city in Europe. I'd always wanted to go to Córdoba since I first heard Obi-Wan Kenobi wistfully mention it in Lawrence of Arabia. However, just as I got to the Great Mosque of Córdoba, a parade was coming by in honor of the beatification of Padre Cristobal de Santa Catalina. Next stop, sainthood for old Cristobal. Google hasn't revealed why he was so groovy, at least nothing in English anyway. After the crowds cleared, I was able to enter the old Mosque of Córdoba, now called the Cathedral of Córdoba.
This is La Mezquita, or as it was known since before about the year 1200, the Great Mosque of Córdoba. Today, the Spanish call it Cathedral of Córdoba, because after they conquered it in the 1200s, they built a giant cathedral in the middle of it. Legend has it that when Charles V, King of Spain, saw what they had done, he said, "You have destroyed something truly unique in this world, and in its place built something ordinary you can find in any city." There are over 850 columns, marble and alabaster, lined in here, and up to 20,000 people could have prayed in here at any one time, which is an amazing thing to consider. It's preserved remarkably well, being over 1,000 years old. The point to which the mosque was oriented where everybody would pray faces to the south, as it would in Damascus, where the Umayyad caliphs trace their origins to, instead of facing towards Mecca, where most mosques orient themselves towards. In building this mosque, the caliphs of Cordoba and of Spain, Al-Andalus as it was called then, were making a statement to the world that their empire rivaled that of Baghdad and any other in the world. When this mosque and Cordoba were in its glory days, Cordoba was the greatest city in Europe. It was a beacon of light, learning, when the rest of Europe was in the Dark Ages. And this, along with the Alhambra Palace, are their greatest living legacies.
That quote attributed to Charles V may be false, but all the biased brochures and information plaques seem so desperate to validate the existence of a cathedral here that it ends up coming across as guilt for having divinely desecrated this place of worship. The cathedral will be nice, though small, and only if you've never seen a cathedral before. In context of its surroundings, it seems at the least tacky and mundane. Its forced insertion here is hodgepodge, and its surroundings really only create a further disparity of aesthetic grace. There's enough left to easily imagine the mosque when it was in its original state, when it was a wonder of the medieval world. The air is heavy with 1,000 years of incense, and the forest of columns seem to stretch out into infinite space. Pictures do not accurately portray the grand size of this place. Strangely enough, today you can start to hear Arabic spoken again in the streets of Andalusia. A wave of immigrants from Muslim countries seems to be bringing back that flavor to this area that is such a defining part of its history. Of all the great remnants of European history that I've seen, those in the south of Spain, Andalusia, are my favorite. Maybe it's just because it's so different from the Greek, Gothic, and Roman styles that are overplayed everywhere else. I'm sure I'll have many times in the future where I look for any excuse I can find to come back to Andalusia.